Hi everyone, and I'm John Fullerton, and in a sense, this retreat began to form almost 20 years ago, or certainly 20 years ago, because over 20 years ago, I left my career at JP Morgan in 2001 and really walked away with no plan and no idea what I wanted to do next, but having kind of worked in the pinnacle of high finance, a lot of it in capital markets and derivatives, and then the last part of it in venture capital and private equity. I just had sort of this inner voice tugging at me saying, time for you to move on. And I'd actually begun to dabble or explore this idea that we now call impact investing. I made a $22 million investment in an education company in 1997, believe it or not, and had the same conversations about philanthropy and doing well and doing good, and can you mix the two, that unfortunately are still going on today, pretty much unchanged. But I've been thinking about our capitalist system pretty deeply, really ever since then. And soon after I left the firm in 2001, the first sort of serious day I had back in New York City to think about what I was going to do next turned out to be 9/11. And I experienced that from Lower Manhattan, very up close and personal. And that pushed me into kind of what I call a deep think period of my life. Lasted probably 7 years, and I started reading books that bankers don't read. And I discovered the environmental crisis as a systemic issue, and I learned there was something called system science. And importantly, I read Limits to Growth, which was the famous study to the Club of Rome written in the 1970s that had been ridiculed, but essentially predicted or anticipated what we now call the polycrisis. And when I read it, it struck me that it was, impossible to deny that exponential growth on a finite planet can't continue forever. And as a financier, I understood that the finance algorithm that really drives economics was very much at the root of this challenge. And so I've been spending, it's kind of crazy to, now that so much time has gone by, I've been spending the last 2 decades of my life wrestling with this massive question of how we can reimagine and redesign our economic system so that it doesn't break the planet and then it generates more equitable outcomes for people and for places, and so that it doesn't destroy the underlying life system of the planet. And I wouldn't call it a solution, but the search that I've been on led me to this idea of regeneration, which is essentially, simply understood, the process of how life works. It's the process of living systems. And in studying the history of economics, it's both intellectually fascinating and terrifying that we still run the world on a system that's rooted in Newtonian physics and is in conflict with the patterns and principles of how life works. So there's a lot more to this, obviously, than what I'll share right now. But I think what's pertinent here is that, I've set up a little institute to explore these ideas. I've been running a course now that both Katie and Demetrius joined in the first cohort now almost 2 years ago. And there's now 1,500 or so people that have been through it and are doing amazing things in the world. And maybe I would just close by saying that while this all sounds very big and abstract, I believe with every bone in my body that we're going through a transformation that is very big, but the way we can manifest it and concretize it is in our own context, in our own place, in our own organizations. And so this project that I've been invited to join is a wonderful example of how we can bring these ideas and land them on the ground in the context of a real place. So maybe I'll stop there. I could keep talking, but I'll stop there for now. the idea here is that we have constructed an economy, and we construct our businesses and our organizations as if they're machines rather than living systems. And so by shifting to thinking of them as living systems, there's all kinds of potential that we can unlock for as the source of our future prosperity. And again, just to sort of reinforce what Demetrius just said about using this as a metaphor, these principles are, I'm not sure I'd use the word universal too lightly, but the idea is that these principles and patterns exist everywhere at all scales. So just like every snowflake is unique, every snowflake also looks like a snowflake. So we're going to one context to learn and experience and concretize these. But as Demetrius said, as a metaphor to take back into our own context, whether it's the company we work in, or the community we live in, or the country that we live in, these are meant to be relevant across scales and contexts.